I've seen hundreds of faces pass through this station, but only one ever made me forget. The sound of the last train leaving. The night was heavier than usual. The kind of rain that doesn't pour, it lingers, whispering against the glass roof of the station like it's trying to lull the world to sleep. Midnight had passed an hour ago, and the platform was nearly empty except for the sound of dripping water and the hum of vending machines. I was halfway through my shift, walking the length of Platform 6 for what felt like the 100th time. It was routine checking for anyone left behind after the last train, making sure no one was sleeping on the benches, locking up the gates. Most nights, it was just me and the echoes. But that night, someone was still there. He was sitting near the far end of the platform, under the dim yellow light that flickered every few seconds. A man in a wheelchair, his hands folded over his lap, head tilted slightly as if listening to the rain. He looked calm at first glance, but when I got closer, I realized he was handsome, well-dressed, too, and I couldn't help wondering how a guy like him ended up in a wheelchair. Apart from that, I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the kind of stillness that comes from exhaustion, not peace. "Sir," I said gently, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't startle him. "The last train's already gone. Are you waiting for someone?" He looked up slowly. His eyes caught mine, tired, distant, but still alert. "No," he said after a pause. "I think I already missed him." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but there was something about the way he said it, quiet, almost tender, that made me feel it wasn't about the train. I cleared my throat, stepping closer. "The next one isn't until morning. Do you need a ride somewhere? I can help call a cab." He shook his head. "Can't afford one. I'll just wait." The word wait hung in the air like a fragile thread. There was no bitterness in his tone, only resignation. I looked around the empty station, the flickering lights, the wind pushing cold rain in through the gaps of the roof. It wasn't a place meant for anyone to stay through the night, let alone someone like him. "Look," I said, shifting awkwardly, "you can't stay out here. It gets freezing after 2. There's a small staff room inside. You can wait there until the first train." He hesitated. "You don't have to do that." "I know," I replied, "but I want to." He studied me for a moment, as if trying to figure out whether I was just being polite or if I really meant it. Then he nodded once, wordless. I walked beside him as he wheeled himself toward the staff section. His chair was old, one of the wheels squeaked slightly with every turn. I wanted to offer help, but something told me he wouldn't like that. So I just stayed close, keeping the door open when we reached it. Inside, the air was warmer. The staff room wasn't much, just a couch, a coffee machine, a heater that made a low rattling sound, and a desk full of forgotten paperwork. Still, it was better than the cold platform. "Make yourself comfortable," I said, setting my cap down. "You want coffee?" He gave a faint smile. "If it's not trouble." I poured 2 cups. The machine sputtered like it was complaining about the hour. When I handed him the mug, our fingers brushed slightly. His skin was cold, and for a second, I caught his scent clean, faintly citrus, like soap after a long day. I pretended not to notice. We sat in silence for a while. The rain outside softened, and the ticking of the clock filled the quiet. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. His face looked calm now, but there was a deep tiredness behind it, like someone who'd carried too much for too long. "What's your name?" I asked finally. "Ethan," he said. "And you?" "Liam." He nodded slightly. "Thanks, Liam." I don't know why, but the sound of him saying my name felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because it was the first real thing said between us, something simple, human, in a space meant for passing trains and people who never stayed. When the clock hit 1:30, I noticed Ethan fighting to stay awake. His head tilted slightly, eyelids drooping. I stood up quietly, adjusting the heater closer to him. He didn't say anything, but his eyes opened briefly enough to meet mine again. "You don't have to stay," he murmured. "I know," I said softly, "but I will." He gave a tired half-smile before closing his eyes. And, for the first time in months, the station didn't feel empty anymore. He fell asleep not long after, the soft rise and fall of his chest matching the rhythm of the rain outside. I sat across from him, the dim yellow light painting shadows across the room. The heater hummed quietly, filling the silence with a kind of warmth that wasn't just physical. There was something about watching someone sleep that felt sacred, especially a stranger. It reminded me how fragile we all are when we let our guard down. And Ethan, he looked like someone who hadn't had a reason to rest in a long time. I should have gone back to my rounds, but I didn't. I stayed. Maybe because I was tired too, not in the way that sleep could fix, but in the way life wears you down bit by bit. Around 2 in the morning, he stirred. His fingers twitched first, then his head lifted slightly, eyes blinking against the dim light. Did I fall asleep? He asked, voice groggy. Just for a bit, I said, smiling. You needed it. He rubbed his eyes, then looked toward the window where rain still traced crooked lines down the glass. Sorry, you probably have work to do. Nothing that can't wait, I replied. Night shifts are quiet here. You were the only interesting thing to happen tonight. He let out a soft laugh, a small sound, but real. That's a sad kind of compliment. Maybe, I said, but true. He looked at me for a moment, that faint smile fading into something more thoughtful. Why do you do this job? Working nights? Staying up for people who barely notice you? I shrugged. Someone has to. Besides, I like quiet places. They make it easier to think. About what? I hesitated, unsure how much truth to give. About everything I didn't become. He didn't say anything right away, just nodded slowly like he understood. Yeah, he whispered. I think about that too. He glanced down at his chair then, his fingers tracing the wheel's edge unconsciously. The gesture was small, but I felt its weight. Were you traveling tonight? I asked gently. He shook his head. No, I used to take this route a lot before the accident. I guess I just wanted to see it again. His voice cracked at the end, just slightly. I wanted to ask more, but something in his expression told me not to. Instead, I got up and refilled our cups. The coffee had gone cold, but the act of pouring it gave us both a moment to breathe. When I handed him the new cup, he looked at it, then at me. You don't treat me like I'm broken, he said quietly. Most people do. I sat back down. Maybe because I don't see you that way. The words came out softer than I meant, almost a whisper, but I didn't take them back. He studied me for a long time, and for a moment the air between us felt different charged, but not in the kind of way that demanded anything, just alive. I used to be a teacher, he said after a while. History. Guess I liked the idea that we could learn from the past. He smiled faintly. Now, I just live in it. I leaned forward slightly. You still could teach again. He shook his head. Not the same. Schools don't exactly have ramps that lead to redemption. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said the only thing that felt right, maybe redemption doesn't need ramps. That made him smile again, a real one this time. He looked away, maybe to hide it, maybe because it scared him to feel seen. The clock ticked closer to 3. The storm outside had calmed into a drizzle. We talked about small things, then old music, coffee preferences, the kind of nonsense you use to fill spaces you don't want to end. And yet, underneath every word, something unspoken lingered. A quiet recognition. Two people who didn't mean to meet, but somehow did, at exactly the hour they needed to. When the wind whistled through the doorway, Ethan shivered slightly. I moved to close it tighter, and when I turned back, he was watching me not with curiosity, but something gentler. You're kind, he said, but you don't look happy. That caught me off guard. I gave a small laugh. Guess I'm better at helping others than fixing myself. He nodded knowingly. Yeah, I used to be that way too. We fell quiet again after that. The air felt heavier, like every silence had a story inside it. He finally spoke, almost a whisper. You said you think a lot about what you didn't become. What was that? I looked down at my hands, rough from years of work. A traveler, I said. Someone who didn't stay in one place waiting for trains that never come. He smiled faintly. Funny. I used to think staying was a failure. Now I'd give anything to walk somewhere, anywhere. His eyes met mine again, and in that fragile, late-night quiet, I felt the distance between us fade just a little. For the first time in years, I didn't want the night to end. By 3:30, the rain had stopped completely, leaving behind that strange quiet that always follows a storm as if the world's holding its breath. The tracks shimmered faintly under the platform lights, and every so often, a gust of wind carried in the smell of wet steel and earth. Ethan was wide awake now. His earlier fatigue seemed to have melted into something lighter, almost calm. He rested his hands on his knees, turning the cup of coffee slowly between them as if feeling its faint warmth. You said you like quiet places, he said after a while. Guess that's rare these days. Yeah, I answered, leaning back in my chair. Sometimes I think silence is the only thing that still listens. He looked up at that, a faint smile tugging his lips. That's poetic for a train officer. I laughed softly. Occupational side effect. You learn to fill empty spaces with words that make sense of them. For a moment, it almost felt like we weren't two strangers stuck in a station at 3 a.m. It felt normal. The kind of quiet conversation you'd have with someone who already knows what hurts you, so you don't have to explain. I glanced at the clock again, though I didn't want to. The hours were slipping away too fast. So, Ethan, I said, trying to keep my tone light, you said you used to be a teacher. What kind of history? European, he said. Mostly modern. I like teaching about people how fragile peace can be, how easy it is to repeat mistakes. That sounds depressing, I teased. He chuckled. Maybe, but I always thought if someone could understand what went wrong before, maybe they'd do better next time. There was a quiet sadness in his voice, a softness that came from living too long with the things you can't change. You must have been good at it, I said. He lifted one shoulder in a half shrug. I tried. Kids liked me, I think. Until the accident, anyway. After that, he paused, fingers tightening slightly around the coffee cup. After that, the school said they didn't have the facilities to accommodate me anymore. Budget issues. I frowned. That sounds like an excuse. It was, he said simply. But I didn't fight it. I didn't have the strength to start over again. He turned his gaze toward the window. The glass reflected the faint glow of the platform lights, turning his expression almost ghostly. It's strange. I used to talk to students about resilience, about how history shows people can survive anything. I just never thought I'd have to test that lesson myself. I didn't know what to say. There are moments when sympathy feels like the wrong language, too soft, too hollow. So instead, I just sat there with him, letting silence be enough. After a while, I asked, "Do you live nearby?" "Not really," he said. "Just a small apartment 2 towns over. It's quiet, though. Too quiet sometimes." "Anyone waiting for you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not anymore." Something in the way he said it told me not to ask further. Still, the thought lingered, who had he been waiting for when I found him on that platform? I leaned forward a little, resting my arms on my knees. "You know, I used to think I liked being alone," I said. "But lately, I'm not so sure. The quiet can get loud sometimes." He smiled faintly. "You sound like you've been carrying that for a while." "Maybe," I admitted. "My mom passed away last year. I was taking care of her for most of my life. After she was gone, I didn't really know what to do with the time I had left." Ethan looked at me, really looked. His expression softened in that subtle, unspoken way people do when they understand pain too well. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," I murmured. She was tired. It was her time. For a long moment, we didn't speak. Just the soft hum of the heater filled the air and the faint click of the clock. Then Ethan said quietly, "It's strange how grief changes you. It makes everything else feel smaller, like nothing else can touch you the same way again." He was right. And yet, as he said it, I realized something was beginning to touch me again, the simple, unexpected warmth of sitting with him. I noticed the faint tremor in his hand as he adjusted his cup. Without thinking, I reached out to steady it. My fingers brushed his briefly just a second, but it was enough. Enough to make my chest tighten, enough to make me forget the hour. He didn't pull away. His eyes met mine, soft but searching. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me," he whispered. There was no answer I could give that felt right. So I just nodded. We sat there for a long time after that, side by side in the small staff room, both pretending we weren't memorizing the details, the sound of the rain fading outside, the faint hum of lights, the reflection of a stranger who didn't feel like one anymore. And in that silence, something inside me began to shift, something I hadn't felt in years. It was nearing 4 when the heater sputtered again, a low metallic groan echoing through the quiet. The air had turned cooler, but neither of us seemed to notice. We were too deep in that kind of silence that only happens when two people have already said everything that matters, not with words, but with the spaces between them. Ethan had his bag on his lap, fingers idly running over the worn fabric. The strap was frayed in one corner, and I caught myself wondering how long he'd carried it, where it had been before tonight. He was telling me about a student he once taught a boy who dreamed of being a painter but dropped out because his parents didn't think it was practical. Ethan's voice carried a quiet ache when he spoke. "I told him that sometimes you don't chase dreams for success," he said softly. "You chase them because they're the only thing that makes you feel alive." "Did he listen?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "No, but I hope he remembered." As he reached for his cup, something slipped from between the folds of his bag, a photograph, worn at the edges. It fluttered to the floor, face up, landing near my boot. I bent down before he could move. It was a picture of Ethan standing beside another man, both smiling, arms wrapped around each other, sunlight spilling across their faces. They looked happy, weightless, like people who believed the future was still theirs. But what struck me most wasn't the smile, it was the difference. In the picture, Ethan was standing. He froze the moment he saw what I was holding. A flicker of panic crossed his face, quickly replaced by something quieter, almost shameful. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, handing it back. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," he murmured, taking the photo. His eyes lingered on it for a moment before he slipped it back into the bag. "That was a long time ago." I hesitated. "He looked close to you." Ethan's hand stilled on the zipper. Then, with a sigh, he said, "He was." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a kind of worn-out tenderness that made my chest ache. "Was he your—" I started carefully, not wanting to assume. He nodded once, cutting me off gently. "Yeah, we were together for 4 years. He left after the accident." I didn't know what to say. All the usual things, "I'm sorry, that's awful," felt useless, too small for the weight of what he'd just shared. "He couldn't handle it?" I asked quietly. "He said he missed the old me," Ethan replied, staring into the dark window. "The one who could dance, cook, take trips, climb stairs. I think he tried to stay at first, but pity has an expiration date." The words hit hard. Not because they were bitter, they weren't. They were just true. He looked up at me then, eyes reflecting the dim glow of the heater. Funny thing is, I didn't even blame him. I think I was angry at myself more for not being enough anymore. I swallowed. "You are enough." He let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. "You don't know me, Liam." "Maybe not," I said, my voice lower now. "But I can tell when someone's still fighting to stay alive. That's enough." For a long while, he didn't respond. His eyes studied me quietly, like he was trying to decide whether to believe me. Then he said, "You talk like someone who's lost love too." I looked down at my hands. "I almost did," I admitted. "There was a guy I worked with years ago. We got close, closer than we should have, but I was too afraid. Didn't want people to know, didn't want to lose my job. So I stayed quiet. Watched him fall in love with someone braver." Ethan's gaze softened. "And you never told him?" I shook my head. "By the time I found the courage, it was too late." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Fear is a cruel thing," he said finally. "It makes you think silence protects you, but really it just builds walls around what could have been." We both fell quiet again after that. The clock ticked, steady and indifferent, marking time we'd never get back. Outside, the first hint of dawn began to creep across the horizon, a thin, pale light that barely touched the glass. I looked at him then, at the way the faint morning glow brushed against his face, softening every scar time had left. I didn't see a broken man. I saw someone who had survived. And maybe that was what drew me closer. Not pity, not guilt, but recognition. He must have sensed it too, because when our eyes met, neither of us looked away. The air felt heavier, charged with something neither of us dared name. Then Ethan spoke, barely above a whisper. "Don't look at me like that, Liam." "Like what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Like you see something worth saving." I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping me. "Maybe I do." He shook his head, eyes glistening, and turned away, but not before I caught the smallest tremor in his smile. The rain had stopped hours ago, but inside that little room, something else was still falling slow, invisible, inevitable. The clock had crept closer to 4:30 when I noticed it, the slight tremor in Ethan's hands, the way his jaw tightened as if holding something inside. For hours, we had talked quietly, shared stories, and filled the empty room with small confidences. But now, the stillness felt different, heavier. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered suddenly, eyes fixed on the floor. His voice was calm, almost casual, but I heard the edge underneath, the kind that comes from someone trying to protect themselves. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning a little forward. "I mean, you don't have to stay with me. You shouldn't waste your night on me," he said, his words rushing out now, tripping over themselves. I'm a burden. People like you, they don't want to waste their time on someone like me." My chest tightened. "A burden? Ethan, that's not true." He shook his head violently, the first sign of real agitation I'd seen all night. "Yes, it is. Look at me. stuck in this chair, relying on others to do things I used to do myself. You could be anywhere else, doing anything else, and instead, you're here, helping me. I stood, taking a step closer. I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I want to be. Do you understand that? He looked up then, eyes glistening, and I saw it. The mix of fear and shame that comes from a lifetime of hiding vulnerability. You don't have to lie to make me feel better, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You're just being polite. You'll leave in the morning, and I'll be alone again. I shook my head, frustrated now. Not at him, but at the unfairness of it all. Do you think I'm pretending? Do you think I don't want to be here? Ethan, I've been alone for a long time. I've stayed up nights thinking about what I lost, who I let slip away. And now, here you are, someone who matters, someone real. And you're telling me I don't belong? His lips quivered. No, listen to me. I interrupted gently, kneeling so we were eye to eye. I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I choose to be. You're not a burden. You're alive. You're real. And for once, I can feel something again. Do you understand that? His eyes searched mine, the storm outside fading into silence, leaving only us in that small, warm room. I could see the walls he had built around himself, the fear of being abandoned, of being pitied, of being too much, and I wanted to tear them down, one gentle word at a time. You really mean that? He whispered, voice almost trembling. Yes, I said firmly. I really mean it. And if you push me away, you'll regret it. Not because I'll leave, but because you'll never know what's waiting if you let someone care. For a moment, he just stared, chest rising and falling rapidly. The weight of everything we hadn't said is past. My regrets, the lonely nights, the lost love seemed to press down between us. I'm scared, he admitted finally, voice cracking. I'm scared of needing someone, of wanting someone, and then losing them. I can't take it again. I reached out slowly, letting my hand hover just above his shoulder. Not touching yet, just offering the choice. You don't have to be scared, I whispered. Not tonight, not with me. He swallowed, eyes glistening. And then, after a long pause, he leaned just slightly toward me, not fully, but enough. Enough for me to feel the warmth, the trust, the vulnerability he rarely showed. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Neither do I said softly, smiling faintly. But maybe we can figure it out together. The tension in the room didn't vanish. It hung between us, thick and unspoken. But for the first time, it wasn't fear that filled the space. It was connection. The slow, fragile beginning of something neither of us had expected. Hope. We stayed like that for a long time. Not talking, not moving, just existing together in the quiet aftermath of confessions and storms. I could feel every breath, every heartbeat, every tremor of his hands. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the night this impossible electric night was changing both of us. Outside, the rain had completely stopped. Dawn was still hours away, but the darkness didn't feel empty anymore. Not while he was here, not while he let me stay. And I knew, deep down, that this night would linger with me long after the first train carried him away. The first pale streaks of dawn were just beginning to touch the platform, softening the shadows and turning the glass roof into a blur of faint gold. The rain from earlier had left the track slick and reflective, the station smelling faintly of wet metal and earth. It was quiet now, almost unnaturally so, and for the first time, I realized how much the night had changed me. Ethan sat in his wheelchair near the door, shoulders relaxed for the first time since I met him. The heater had finally cooled, and the coffee cup sat empty on the table, long since abandoned. His eyes were still fixed on the tracks, but there was a softness in them that hadn't been there hours ago. You're leaving soon, I said quietly, not wanting to break the fragile silence. He nodded, letting out a small sigh. Yeah, first train comes in 20 minutes. I pushed his chair gently toward the edge of the platform, my hands on the handles. The morning light touched his face, and I realized how pale and delicate he looked after the long, sleepless night. I felt a pang of protectiveness I couldn't explain. I'm glad you stayed, he said softly. I didn't expect anyone would. I told you, I replied, voice low. I wasn't staying out of obligation. I stayed because I wanted to. His eyes flicked to mine, searching as if trying to read the truth behind my words. Even after everything? You still? Yes, I said firmly. Even after everything. I don't know why, but I'm glad I did. We wheeled toward the edge of the platform, and I felt the cold air brush against our faces. The first train of the morning was visible in the distance, faint lights cutting through the mist. A soft rumble reached us, and I realized that soon we'd be separated again, the night ending, leaving behind only what had happened in these hours. Ethan stopped and looked at me. "You stayed the whole night," he said. "Why?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to give the simple answer, duty, routine, kindness, but that wasn't true. Not entirely. "It was never about duty," I said softly. "It was about seeing you, about being here for someone who lets themselves be seen." He looked away, faintly embarrassed, but I could see the warmth spreading across his chest. The faint tremble in his hands returned, and I held onto the chair lightly, giving him stability and perhaps, unknowingly, a connection. The rumble of the train grew louder. The moment was coming. I knew there would be no more words that could capture what the night had been. The confessions, the shared vulnerabilities, the unspoken understanding between two broken people who had found something fragile and real. "Will I see you again?" he asked quietly, almost too softly to hear. "I don't know," I admitted. "But if you ever miss the last train again," I hesitated, letting the words hang in the air, "I'll be there." He smiled faintly, just the corners of his lips, and the morning light hit his face perfectly, the kind of moment that feels frozen, impossible to forget. Then the train arrived, its wheels hissing against the wet tracks. I watched him board, his chair secured and straps fastened. We locked eyes through the glass doors, neither moving, neither blinking too long. And in that stretch of time fleeting, fragile, I wanted to reach out, to say everything I'd felt and all I would feel in the days to come. But the doors closed, cutting off the space between us. He was gone, carried forward by the train and the morning. I stayed on the platform a moment longer, hands in my pockets, feeling the echo of the night linger like a ghost. I walked back toward the staff room slowly, each step weighted with a strange mix of sorrow and hope. The station was empty now, lights flickering as if tired from holding the night together. I poured myself another coffee, watching the sunlight slowly creep over the tracks. I didn't know if I'd see Ethan again. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But I knew one thing in the quiet hours of a stormy night. Two strangers had found something rare, connection. And for a moment, however brief, that was enough. The night had ended, the rain was gone. But the memory of him, the vulnerability, the trust, the faint brush of warmth in his hand stayed with me, carried quietly forward as I began another day. And I knew, deep down, that no matter how far he traveled or how long it took, part of him would always be here in the station, in the quiet, in the spaces between the tracks and the morning light. It had been 3 weeks since that night, the rain, the heater, the quiet room with the small hum of the city around us. 3 weeks in which every train, every empty platform reminded me of him. Ethan, I didn't know where he'd gone, if he was okay, or if he even thought about that night as much as I did. The station was quiet again, early morning light spilling across the tracks, the smell of wet concrete lingering from an early drizzle. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, staring out over platform 6, letting my thoughts drift back to the storm, and then it came. A small envelope slipped under the staff room door. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in careful, familiar handwriting. My chest tightened as I picked it up. Inside, folded neatly, was a short note. "Liam, thank you for staying. I don't know if I'll ever get another night like that, quiet, simple, honest. You reminded me that someone can see you without pity, without expectation. I won't ask for more than this memory, but I hope you carry it with you, as I will. Ethan." I sat down slowly, letting the paper rest on my lap. The words were brief, but they carried the weight of every unspoken conversation, every shared laugh, every brush of hands that neither of us could name. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to reply, to say something, anything, but the truth was, there wasn't anything left to say. Ethan had said everything in the quiet way he always did, softly, without demand, leaving me to hold it. I traced the edges of the paper with my fingers, remembering the warmth of his hand that night. I remembered the tremor in his grip, the way his eyes searched mine when he confessed his fears, the way he leaned just slightly toward me, the faint smile that had carried hope without promising anything. The letter was his goodbye, his gift, his trust, and I understood that was enough. I folded it carefully and tucked it into my pocket, letting it rest over my heart. The platform outside was empty now, except for the occasional echo of a cleaning cart or a distant train whistle. The world moved on, indifferent to the nights that change us, but I didn't mind. I took a deep breath, watching the sunlight reflect on the wet rails. I imagined him somewhere beyond the station, perhaps moving slowly through a quiet street, the city waking up around him. Maybe he was smiling, thinking of that strange, fragile night too. Maybe he wasn't, and yet the thought didn't hurt. It only reminded me of the fleeting magic of connection, brief, unexpected, unforgettable. Somewhere in the city, someone else would pass through rain and darkness. Someone would find warmth and kindness in an unexpected place. And somewhere in my memory, Ethan would remain a ghost of laughter, coffee, whispered words, and hands that trembled but trusted. I let the station fall silent around me, letting the memory of him fill the room, fill the morning. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled not because I had him, not because I would see him again, but because I had known him. That in itself was enough. I stood up, sliding the letter back into my jacket, and stepped out onto the platform. The rails glinted in the sunlight. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, and I felt it, the ache, the warmth, the lingering possibility of connection. It was bittersweet, yes, but it was alive. And that was the kind of gift that lasts, longer than any train, longer than any night, longer than the fleeting fear of being alone. Somewhere, I knew, Ethan remembered too. And that was enough. The tracks stretched ahead, gleaming in the early light, and I walked along them slowly, carrying the quiet weight of memory, a night that had changed me, a stranger who had touched my life, and a love unspoken yet unforgettable. So, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and consider making a donation to our channel if you enjoyed this slow burn romance love story. See you soon.